So now, for our last presentation of this session, I would really like to hand over to my M&D friend, my colleague, and my co-mentor, Sara Feldman, who's going to be talking to us about the kind of a prospective clinical trials, a view from the clinic.
Hi, my name is Sara Feldman. I'm the physical therapist and assistive technology professional at the MDA ALS Center of Hope, which is at Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm also the clinical evaluator for the different clinical trials that we do. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. When I think about research, there's different areas that I consider. There's the research that allied health professionals that we can do, looking at something that we're interested in. There's a natural history of ALS where you're looking at the person with ALS over time. And then there's the clinical trials or of drugs or investigational devices. The discipline-specific research you all may be very familiar with. There are different presentations you're going to be hearing during this Allied Health Professionals Forum from maybe an occupational therapist talking about neck braces or a social worker talking about caregivers. These are all just, actually is what makes me so excited about the Allied Health Professionals Forum, and it gives you a glimpse into what people are doing at their level in the different allied health professionals. In physical therapy, there's a big push for evidence-based interventions. So we are a lot of times we'll focus on different treatments, different assessments, and equipment and assistive technology. One area that's been really big in the last few years is looking at exercise in ALS. And you can see that people throughout the world, there's people in Italy, the US, Japan, Israel, and even other areas who are all looking at how does exercise impact ALS. I'm also as the assistive technology professional, I'm also very interested in assistive technology and equipment. And one of the nice things about looking at this kind of research is that you can, I can work closely with speech language pathologists and occupational therapists as well when we're looking at different devices that people are using. Natural history covers kind of both areas as well. You're looking at the progression, you're collecting data over the progression timeline of that person. So that can impact when you're thinking about the equipment. So when do people get different equipment at different times? And it also can impact clinical trials as if they're looking for biomarkers over the natural history of the person. But clinical trials, that's what we're going to talk about today. So when I was first asked to do clinical trials and be the outcome measures person about 20 years ago, I really didn't know what that meant and what I was getting into. So I thought it'd be good to give a little background for other people who may be interested in doing it. First, there's different agencies in different countries that are the overarching regulatory agencies that decide what drugs are moving forward and what's happening with the different drugs. You might have heard a lot about these different agencies looking at the drugs most recently in the news. There's different study phases. Phase 1 is when somebody's getting something very early on. It's usually a small number of people just to make sure that what they're getting is safe. Phase 2 is a little bit larger. And then you're actually starting to look at efficacy. And this is where the outcome measures come in, as well as phase 3. That's a much larger group, and now they're really looking at efficacy. And the outcome measures that they're talking about are usually done during the phase 2 and phase 3 studies of the larger groups. And there's some phase 2A, 2B. If you want to learn more about the different phases of the studies, I would go to fda.gov. So when you're talking about, I work at a university and we're getting different trials in. How does that even happen? So the sponsors have these trials available, and then they let the investigators know that this is happening. So the investigators do a feasibility report saying whether or not we believe that we can do this at our site. And then there's a pre-site selection visit, which is either done in person or remotely, where they affirm that we have the ability to do the study. And then there's a lot of contracts that go back and forth between the sponsor and our site, making sure that everyone's going to get paid. And then there's the regulatory piece where the institutional review board, whether it's at your institution locally or a centralized one, has to approve all the paperwork and all the protocols and everything that's moving forward. We all have to do our own training as well from the institutional review board, and we have to follow good clinical practice and get training before any of this has even started. Once you've been selected at a site as a site, so usually if the study is starting up, this is all this, a lot of sites are being selected at the same time. So then we go to an investigator meeting, and the regulatory piece is on the pre and post and future regulatory piece runs throughout the whole thing. But we go to the investigator meeting, and then you start your training, and you get equipment delivered to your site so you can complete your training, and then you have a site initiation visit. So the investigator meeting is where everyone comes together and learns about what is happening with that drug, why they think the drug is a good fit for the ALS population, and how they think it's going to help. And then you get the hands-on training at the site, and then you get like I said, the equipment delivered, and then your site is initiated and you can open up to people. So I'm going to pull out the outcome certification just for a second from that timeline and talk about, go into that a little bit more, because this is going to be a much more of a discussion about outcomes as we go through the next section. So at the investigator meeting, again, where they're talking about the drug itself and the different assessments that we're going to be doing, that's when you learn what the assessments are that they want to do for that trial. That's when you learn what the outcome measures are, and you get the hands-on training. So, of course, in the past year, things have been remote and all done via telemedicine, but in the past before that, the investigator meeting, everyone got there together in place and learned all together. You then leave from there and you do your certification by doing the outcome measures that you've learned, and then submitting, you do them on some other people, and then submitting what you've done back to whoever's testing you to make sure that you are able to perform them appropriately. There's intra-rater, so that I have to do it once and then do it again later on to make sure that I'm doing it the same way both times. And there's inter-rater reliability, where I do it and then another person at my clinic will do it, who's another, who will also be doing that outcome measure, so that they know that we're doing it the same. And then there's also quality assurance. There's ongoing manuals and videos that we have to watch and we have to follow, because you have to get retrained every year. Even if you've been doing it for 20 years, you still have to show that you can do it. And every study asks that you can, that you show it for each particular study. And why is it important to have this standardization? Because it promotes that we all do it in a consistent, reliable manner. It's very important that we're all doing it the same. That way, all this collected data is valid and reproducible. I can do the breathing test on this person, and I can do the breathing test on this person, and somebody else can come along and do the same test and get the same results. That is also suitable for multi-site studies. So if I'm doing it here, somebody's doing it in California, we're getting similar data. It minimizes the variability. It's very important when you're doing these that everyone's doing it the same. The certification for a lot of these studies is done in one large group in the United States is the Northeast ALS Consortium, or NEALS, and they work with Barrow Neurological Institute to ensure that everyone's getting the same training. And then in Europe is TriCals, and you can go on their websites and find out more about the training if you're interested. And then examples of outcome measures. So the measures themselves that we're doing for all these studies that people are coming in and have to go through. There's a functional scales, and these are examples, the ALS-FRS-R, I'm sure many people are familiar with. The ROADS, which is the Rasch-Built Overall ALS Disability Scale, is a newer one that's being used these days. There's pulmonary function tests. There's a forced vital capacities, slow vital capacities, MIPS, MEPS, peak flows, different ones depending on what you're studying. A lot of questionnaires, quality of life questionnaires, patient-reported outcome measures, very big right now. They want to know how patients feel. Strength testing, whether it's a manual muscle test or a handheld dynamometry or the Atlas, there are different ways that you can test the strength for people. There are other outcome measures on fatigue, balance, function, timed up and go test, the 25-foot walk test, the 6-minute walk test. All these are examples of different outcome measures that could be done for a clinical trial. The outcome measures then, there's a primary one, which is usually the one that they're looking for, that they want to see if they're able to affect that particular outcome measure. Secondary ones, so maybe they're looking at the ALS-FRS-R as their primary one, but then the strength, the pulmonary function test, et cetera, as secondary ones to see if they can impact those. And then exploratory outcomes, they may be something that they're trying to look at. You do have to be careful that there's not too many assessments. You really want to pick the best measure for that study design. So if the drug is supposed to be helping your breathing, then the SVC or FVC should be what your primary outcome is. Or if it's strength, it should be strength. If the drug affects strength, it should be strength. Because too many assessments can be a burden on the person. It can, they might be fatigued. They might not want to do it. You might start to lose data. It impacts on the clinical side, how much time we have, how much space we have, and then, of course, training and equipment costs for doing the outcome measures. So what happens? So we arrive early that day to prepare for the person coming in. All the source documents are ready, all of our paperwork, our equipment's calibrated, set up, the batteries are charged, it's ready to go, the Wi-Fi is working. The person arrives, and then we're gonna follow the schedule of events from that point on. If it's a screening visit, this is when we'll fully explain the study to the person. We'll obtain informed consent. We'll evaluate for inclusion-exclusion criteria. We'll do the different outcome measures. Sometimes the outcome measures are done on screening, so that if there's a learning curve for certain outcomes, so that if it's a specific kind of manual muscle test like that Atlas, it's good to have it set up the first on the screening so that you're not setting it up baseline for the first time. It's also important because of inclusion-exclusion criteria. So during the screening visit, doing the PFT may be what lets that person in or not in the study, or if they have to have a certain amount of grip strength or any number of reasons why an outcome measure might be what gets them in or out. The baseline or follow-up, you're collecting events, concomitant meds, and then the procedures begin. They get their vital signs. There's usually EKG, labs. And then the outcome measures are done maybe pre-dose for some. Some are, you have to do all these things. You have to do the vitals, the EKG, the labs, everything before the outcome measures are done. And I mean, before the dose, you get the outcome measures and then the person gets the dose. And some they're done after because they want to see how the medication affects the person. The labs may be repeated for pharmacokinetics. So it may be that they get the dose out 1 hour, and then labs are drawn at hour 6 and maybe at hour 12, because they want to see what's happening within the body for those drugs. There may be a lumbar puncture involved to see if it crosses the blood-brain barrier. The person is discharged with instructions. You clean up, you enter your data into the electronic case report form, and then, of course, people follow up with monitoring visits and queries. Keys are to be organized, to have your documentation ready, to know your responsibilities, and then of course to be flexible so that if it snows that morning or if whatever happens, you can react to it. I want to talk a little bit about remote assessments quickly. Historically, we've used them as interim assessments. So if somebody's coming in this week and they're not coming in for 4 weeks, maybe at week 2, we call them up to do different questionnaires, do the ALS, FRSR. Technological advancements have increased, like wearables, activity monitors, accelerometers, and sensors. Smartphone apps that people speak into, that has already been increasing. But then when COVID hit and people weren't able to come in, we really looked at what can we do to still collect the data if people can't come into the clinic. And so doing these remote assessments can increase participation. It can decrease the participant burden. It can increase the frequency that you get the assessments if they can't come in every 2 weeks, but you can get them. But there is a challenge. Not everyone has access to the technology. Does it really compare to what you're doing in clinic? And then of course, consistency and who's helping. So somebody might do really well if their daughter's helping them, but not do so well if their home health aide is helping them with the different assessments. But what remote assessments really can help is that whole location thought. And you look at this map, this is on the Healy website. This is publicly available. And you can see that there's large areas of the United States that don't have access to a clinical trial site. And I also have to mention the people living with ALS and their caregivers and what they're doing to help push trial design, to change trial design. There's the Housing Counts Advisory Council, there's the CRLI people from NEALS. They're really getting involved in trial design, and they're talking about what difficulties they have, difficulties in deciding to participate, will they qualify, how can they travel to the different sites, what are the procedures, and they want to make sure that the outcome measures that are done are really relevant to what they want. And I have to say, to end this, is that I've been doing the clinical trials now for a very long time, and I have to say that every single person I work with in the clinical trials has been an inspiration and a hero to me, because they are really putting themselves out there and doing something for which they really have no expectation of getting anything back. And to me, that is the true definition of a hero. And with that, I will open this up for questions. Thank you.
Thanks. Sarah, thank you for that. That was really, really interesting. There are no questions on the chat just now, and the time is fairly slim. So I just think what you've highlighted is the importance of clinical trials and how much our patients that come to our clinics value the opportunity to take part in these trials, and how important it is for us to be able to engage at any one time. So thank you for highlighting all of that. I'm just wondering, if you talked about doing trials remotely, but have you had to modify any of the tests you do? The trials, for example, we can no longer do forced vital capacities, for example, in clinic.
So that's an excellent question. And we still are able to do the forced vital capacities in our center, but we did have to modify them. We have to wear full PPE. We have to be in a separate room, like we take the person into a separate room, do it there, and then we have to shut that room down for an hour afterwards. So things have been modified, but we are, I'm sorry, as long as they're vaccinated.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Actually, that's really interesting, because those are the exact same guidelines that we use. Unfortunately, we don't always have separate rooms, so it becomes.
Yes, that is an issue. So for the clinical trials, we try and make sure we always have that. It does impact our clinic more often, and then we'll have people go separately.
Yeah, but There are some questions now, but not sure, Sarah, I'm not sure we've got time to answer them. So I wonder if you can nip into the question and answer them yourself in a short while, because thank you, Sarah, for your presentation. It was really interesting.